Okay, we'll make a start. Thank you so much for everyone that's jumping on and registering. We continue to be super happy with the amount of people that are jumping onto these webinars. We were really happy with the numbers on our last webinar. They've increased by 50% on this one, so we're just really glad we're putting out some information that's really resonating with people. And today, you registered, you know what it is. We're going to talk lifting the lid on ISO 19650, and really, as I've said in some of our other webinars, all over the place, and I guess that makes sense for this topic as well, because it is an ISO standard, and no matter where you are, you need to know how to comply. And we've got we've got Anthony Harte today, who I'll introduce, who's just an incredible expert on this topic. So I'm looking forward to learning about it as well. So to introduce Anthony, I want to point to actually this slide first. So just for anyone that doesn't know, but we're part of Space Group, and Anthony works for BIM Technologies, and BIM Technologies is a BIM consultant for governments, or major corporates, with people building some pretty substantial buildings, very involved in complying with this ISO. I just wanted to show everyone this graphic. When I started at BIM Store, I asked for some cool photos of projects we were working on in the various businesses. I actually only learned a couple of days ago that the one in the top left is the new Google office. I think it's like it's at London King's Cross Station. BIM Technologies there are Google to be their BIM consultant, so really working on some fantastic work. So Anthony is our general manager of BIM Technologies, and as I've said, he is really the expert in this field, really lives it. Quick plug to the rest of our webinar series. We're on number 4, so thank you for being here. Thank you for everyone that signed up for all of them. We've got manufacturer success stories next, and future trends. Any of the content you want to go back and watch, you'll get those links in the emails. It's all on our website, so anything you want to catch up on, do so there. So last thing as well, if you have questions, and please ask questions. We've had some amazing questions throughout the series. Didn't have a lot on the last one, but that was all right. So if you do have questions about ISO 19650 or anything Anthony's talking about, ask them. They're private. They'll go to our moderator. They'll send them through to us, and we'll try and answer them. So thank you. I'll pass over to Anthony.
Thank you, Tyrone. Appreciate that, and appreciate the background. So Anthony from BIM Technologies. We are a Wired Score accredited professional business, which encourages digital connectivity and smart technology to make buildings smarter and better here within the UK. So a little bit about us, just duplicating a little bit what Tyrone has just suggested there in terms of where we've come from. So established in 1957 as a partnership, an architectural partnership. Around 2007 onwards, BIM really gained traction within the UK, and there was a need for BIM consultancies to help other architectural practices in the first instance to upskill and start to deploy BIM within their projects. So 2010, BIM Technologies was created with the intent of helping other architectural practices, but as time went on, it gained traction with other clients and other users. 2011 was the creation of BIM Store, which is our content creation, which is part of the webinar series today. And then in 2020, TwinView was released, which is our digital twin facilities management platform. And our philosophy is simple: it's to improve people's lives through their surroundings, creating spaces that have a positive impact on people, places, and the planet. So a little bit about me, just very quickly. 24 years in industry. Started my BIM journey in 2008 from architectural practice after a number of years into Asda Walmart, looking at their BIM conversion from AutoCAD, and created my first BIM store in 2010, and then went on from there to join BIM Technologies. So today we're looking at episode 4, which is lifting the lid, and it is a fairly dry subject. I can't change that, unfortunately. Standards are quite dry. So I'll start really with discussing what a standard is and how it differs from regulation, which is quite a big, important topic here. So we have regulations and standards, but what do they actually mean? So a standard is a set of advice for you to follow if you choose to. And a regulation is something that's mandatory. So you may sort of ask yourself, what benefits would a business see by implementing standards that aren't already part of regulation? Well, the answer to that is that it helps you protect you and your business in terms of professional indemnity insurance. And if you can show you are working in accordance with a set standard or an agreed set of standards, you're likely to be safer. So the more standardized we can get, the better. So in short, the BIM standards are ideal for everyone in the industry to show they're working to a common agreed ideal standard across both domestically and internationally, across all countries, etc. So it's something we should aspire to. So what do the codes actually mean? So in the UK, slightly different to other parts of the world, the BS for us denotes the British national standards, which are controlled by the British Standards Institute here in the UK. So that precedes the EN. For us, the EN denotes a standard which is adopted by the European community, and it's controlled by the European Committee on Standardisation, which is CEN. And then we have the ISO itself, which denotes a worldwide standard issued by the International Organisation for Standardisation. And once an international standard has been adopted by European standards or British standards, those BSEN codes or prefixes are deployed in front of the ISO to say that it's overwriting a previous standard. So the 19650 is the reference, and the 2 at the end is the part, and many ISOs can have different parts. So for the ISO 19650, it's broken into several different parts, and we'll touch on some of those today. So what I'm going to do is just go through a little bit of a history lesson, really, just to try and give you some background in where it came from. And the standard was developed really from the UK's now superseded BS and PAS 1192, which was a tried and tested sort of BIM information standard, which was established by the BSI around 2007. And ISO sought to adapt and elevate these standards to an international level. So a couple of the key dates for us in the UK, in 2007, building information modelling as a term started to gain traction within the UK construction industry. And in 2008, we saw a government-funded report pushed out, which encouraged the adoption of BIM processes in the public sector to improve efficiency and reduce cost. And since it was first developed, we've had a BIM maturity model, and this has established itself as a key component of the UK BIM policy within what we do. And the idea behind this was to sort of convey the maturity of BIM across industry, but it is commonly misinterpreted, and you'll see that somewhere later in the presentation, as levels of BIM, that we should aspire to get to greater levels of BIM, or it can be used to define what we want. And you may see that in various different conversations and topics where that's untrue. It's actually to establish a maturity. So from 2011 to 2016, we saw some further government advances and really started to drive this through into everything we do in the construction sector. So 2011, we saw the UK government announce its need for 3D BIM on its projects by 2016. So it was portraying a target date for us to reach. In 2012, we see the mandate of BIM Level 2, and that's what it was called, for all government-funded projects by 2016. And then we launched the BIM Task Group, which supported the initiative and promoted that across the UK. And then in 2015, we saw the BS 1192 Part 4 published, which specifies how we should deliver information models and project documentation in a standard format, which is known as COBie. And in 2016, that deadline hit for BIM Level 2 to become mandatory on our government projects, government-funded projects within the public sector. So that really gave us a basis of some British Standard and PAS documents within the UK, and they ran for a few years. And what we found was many other countries had started to adopt the same standards, the same British standards for their country, because they were the most mature at the time. And there were some issues with those. The term BIM Level 2 being one of them was a bit too ambiguous. So we set to sort of refine the BIM maturity and adoption requirements with various things we were doing here in the UK. And also we saw the advancement of the standards themselves. So from 2017 up to the present, what we saw then is various different alliances formed where BIM, aiming to ensure that BIM becomes sort of business as usual and future-proof in industry. In 2018, the ISO 19650 Part 1 and Part 2 were published, and these replaced the former British standards and the PAS standard, and these were international, but the UK played a significant role in developing and setting out those standards. 2019, the CDBB released the UK BIM Framework, which is a suite of documents providing guidance on implementing BIM, and there's some really good resource on the UK BIM Framework website and guidance, which is free to use if you do require further information on the ISO 19650, and it should be, in theory, useful in all countries for the guidance, with the exception of any national annexes that may be deployed. 2020 beyond, we're looking at BIM maturity and looking at the advancements of AI and VR, which is all that good fun stuff. But today we're looking really at, as many other countries started to adopt the BS 1192, there was a requirement to make this an international standard. And it's key here just to say that the UK didn't lead the international adoption. This was played by the international community, who decided to elevate these to international standards, and that was the International Organisation for Standardisation, which is the ISO, which is what it then subsequently became. So the ISO 19650 series was developed with consultation from an international panel of industry experts and associations, which included around 31 participating countries and 14 observing countries. So at that point, around 2018, BIM really became globally recognised as requiring a uniform collaborative standard within everything we do. Now, the problem with that is different countries do need slight different variations. So Part 2 includes national annexes, whereby you can then make that slightly custom to your country and how you deploy things like naming standards, revision management, and the like. So you'll find these national annexes appended to the standards at the back end to make them regional specific, and these provide those opportunities to clarify how it should be implemented in your region. So just to recap then, come 2018 onwards, what we ended up with was the ISO 19650, which superseded the 1192, and we ended up with 5 parts altogether for that standard sort of publication of documents. And within the UK, they are branded BSI, but they are pretty much the same document, as you will see, as just the ISO 19650. Part 1 is the concept and principles. Part 2 is the delivery phase of assets with the national annexes. Part 3 is for operational phase of assets. So really looking at the facilities management, what you need to operate and maintain buildings. Part 4 is for information exchanges between parties. So if you think about the data that we can collect within these 3D models, it's talking about how we can standardize that exchange of data, and that is commonly referred to as COBie, which is a schema to exchange information. And then part 5 is a security-minded approach for information management, because a lot of assets that we may build may be requiring certain security requirements. They could be within the UK, could be government-funded buildings which are more secure, or they could have a lot of data in there that you don't want others to see. So in terms of deploying these, there is also an information protocol, and what the information protocol sets out is making those documents part of contract. So the information protocol is supporting those documents and should be appended to any contract within the construction industry to make BIM part of the deliverables. So just to recap, there's a good link here at the bottom, which should be available, but ukbimmframework.org, and these standards and guidance is really interesting on that website, and you'll find more information in terms of guidance for free on there, but the ISO standards obviously is a paid for document, and it is maintained by a group of volunteers, their time and expertise to develop and maintain this free resource online. So do check it out. There's a load of content on there. So in terms of national annexes, it's the BD 104 within Australia. That's the committee who's responsible for the national annex within your country, within Australia, and they will be putting that together at the back end of the ISO 19650. So moving on from that, just touching on the basics and what it means in simplified terms. So the ISO 19650 sets out how clients can clearly define their project requirements, any standards and milestones that they might want to reach. In the UK, typically REBA standards, and what you may want at any given time, and what's then required by the delivery team, which is the teams responsible for putting together the construction project. The delivery team's plans and mobilisation resources and technology to meet those client requirements. And this is a key one here in terms of resource. So in order to meet certain requirements, the resource could include shared libraries of information that you must use. So we have various clients with BIM Tech that have their own internal libraries. And if you think of retailers, any of the large retailers and housing developers, they have a standard set of components or 3D objects that should be used to make sure that every building, whether that's a high-rise residential or a retail unit, all looks the same. So it's about sharing those resources with the team that's going to be delivering the project. Information is collaboratively produced and managed between those teams, and that's generally shared on what's called a common data environment, which is in theory nothing more than a fancy online sort of share file, document management platform, which has the ability to sort out revision management and send information to the right people at the right time. The information that's produced is reviewed and approved at each level. So this is an important part of the basics, that when information is submitted at those various milestones, it is reviewed and it is approved. And part of what our role is at BIM Tech is auditing BIM projects to make sure that the information that's requested is actually contained within those projects, and that the level of detail of the geometry is also fit for purpose. So if there's certain milestones where geometry needs to hit a certain point, we'll audit those files to make sure that they're using the correct content for the appropriate stage of the project. And then information that should be created is also archived for ongoing operations and maintenance. So that's the basic outline of ISO. So in short, we look for defining the requirements. The client should define those requirements and standards and milestones. They should then deploy the resources and the technology to meet that in a set of documents. And these documents commonly could be referred to as exchange information requirements or asset information requirements, which really portrays what the client wants in terms of detail level from a geometry perspective and also from an information perspective. So it's no point having all of the information really early in terms of planning. It might be too much, you don't need to know it all, or you don't know what that is already in terms of the content. So you wait till later on in the design stage when you've gone through procurement, and that's when you'd really get that information from a manufacturer's perspective. It needs some form of management. So the ISO 19650 sets out that there should be an information management process at its heart to make sure the information is managed and sent out and resourced appropriately. And that's a big part of what the ISO sets to deliver. Some sort of auditing needs to be in place so that information can be reviewed and approved. And then the information is handed over to O&M to archive or use that for the operations and maintenance side. So the basic concept and principles of the ISO refers to parties and teams. It is quite a dry subject, and in order to pick it up, there are a lot of different terminologies within it. And the main items are lead appointed party, appointing party, and appointed party. And these are real tongue twisters. In basic, simple terms, an appointing party is the client, and you would only have one of these per project. And they are the receivers of information. They've commissioned the team and they receive the information. A lead appointed party is responsible for the coordination of the delivery team in terms of the information and the data and the 3D aspect of that as well. And they are the providers of that information, but there could be multiple lead appointed parties. So I'll come on to that on the next slide within a project. And then you have an appointed party who is subcontracted by a lead appointed party to provide information as well. So if you could consider that a subcontractor for the steelwork is the example in the image here. You may have a construction company as a lead appointed party or a contractor, and then the subcontractor of the steelwork framework would be appointed by those to produce the fabrication information. And that could be said for many different parties within how a construction company operates. So you might have one for architecture, a lead appointed party who's responsible for coordinating the main architectural design, and then also the interior design, for example. Same could be said for the subcontractors and the main contractors we've just said there in terms of curtain walling, in sort of services. So you may get a main contractor and they subcontract out those works, and those would be called appointed parties, all feeding into the lead appointed contractor on that project. So how those are deployed in terms of the information management processes, so the concept and principles behind what the process is for information management. This is set out within the ISO 19650, and it is split into various different clauses and areas. And just to touch on some of those today, that 5.1 is the assessment and need, where the appointing party determines what works need to be carried out, the standards that the team delivering that should work to, and any project milestones. And there's various different flowcharts within ISO and within the guidance documents that will help you out in terms of what that process needs to be, in terms of finding the assessment and need, and then how to document that, and also then how to deploy it within projects. Clause 5.2 is an invitation to tender. So the appointing party establishes what their response criteria might be for tender, and then they issue that out to organisations who will formally bid for it. So as part of that invitation to tender, you need to deploy your exchange information requirements and your asset information requirements, which will really set out what you want when you want it, in terms of BIM, the level of detail, again, in that geometry or in the information and the data that you want to hand over as well, most importantly. And any reference information should be shared as well. If you do have resource libraries as a client, you should share those out so that the people tendering understand what they can use or what they should be using. Next on is the tender response. So this is looking there at preparing and submitting the response to that tender request and assessing capability and capacity. So there's a lot of talk about capability assessments within the ISO, making sure that the companies that are bidding for the project have been suitably assessed, that they can deliver BIM projects, and if there's any gaps as well in their tender response, should we look to upskill those companies if we want to select them, or should we select a company that's more skilled and knowledgeable in those particular areas? So at this point as well, we look at nominating individuals to undertake the information management function as part of that tender response. So who's going to look at the information management for that team, and what the BIM execution plan will look like, which is a document set out to answer the client's requirements. Next up would be the appointment side, where the tenders are evaluated and the successful team would then be selected. As part of the appointments, the information protocol should also be appended to the appointment. So the information protocol is sort of a legal document, and it does refer to other BIM documents such as the EIR and AIR in terms of what the client wants. So it will reference those documents, and it will be appended, should be appended to the appointment, which then makes those BIM requirements part of the deliverables, and those milestones then are set into the appointment for the companies to deliver, or the delivery teams to deliver. And then we have the mobilisation of the teams. So the mobilisation really is the delivery team that have won the bid, and they need to now deploy all their skills to start producing information and get that started. So what CDE are we using? What training do we need to look at for the teams, and how do we start looking at those processes and procedures and the technology that needs to be tested, ready to deliver that project. Section 5.6 is the starting now to look at the production of the information. So basically the construction team starting to deliver the design and all the BIM requirements that go with those. So the information is then generated and checked by those different parties. I mentioned earlier about a common data environment, and this should be agreed at the outset. It's never, some of the problems we do have is this is never normally agreed as early on as it should be, or you may get various different CDEs as well, or areas in which documentation is shared. And the ideal situation is you've got one area where all your information is shared, and everybody can have an input into the development of the projects that you're working on. And it's supposed to be a single source for producing information only once, but reusing it many times to eliminate rework, that you can share trusted information, you know it's more up to date, you know it's accurate, and also that it has a clear auditable history. So if you've got various different revisions, you can track the revision process of those files, whatever those files may be. And the ISO talks about information and information containers, but it does mean just the drawings and the spec and everything else that goes with the standard deliverables of a construction project. And then the CDE has various different processes to follow, where you'd have work in progress, you'd go through check and approval areas where these then get officially shared and reviewed and authorised and go into publish, where the client would ultimately then just look in the published folder for anything you've submitted to them, and then archive as well. So, but the CDE should allow for revisions, it should allow for the state of the information, so whether it is work in progress, whether it's published, whether it's for checking, etc. It should allow all those fairly seamlessly. So the idea behind the CDE is sharing that information once, but having multiple uses for it, and the idea is that you can have a single model as well shared on a CDE. And the detail behind that should be sufficient enough to produce your drawing information. So beyond the model itself and all the 3D information that's produced, the drawing information should be cut from the model. And some of the issues we had in the UK when BIM first came about was that you'd get CAD workflows and BIM workflows side by side, and you would get discrepancy in what the drawing information said. So at the very basic, you should be cutting drawings from the model itself, and that means that the content within those models needs to be suitable for drawing production as well. And the idea is to eliminate any wastage in production of information and make sure we've got the right kit of parts within those models and within those clients to make sure that we get the job done correctly and they are suitable then for all stages of the project. Behind the scenes of any 3D model of various different components, and architects, engineers will look, if they haven't got them internally, will look to source those components from various different ways, a lot of online content providers, etc. So again, what you're seeing here is part of BIM Store, but for house builders or retailers, this is incredibly useful to have your standard content that you procure as default hosted somewhere for your teams to be using. And with that, you may get all of the facilities information as well. You might get the O&M packs of information all readily available, already embedded in as links into those files. So just touching on here how the collaborative process would work with the information. If we look at a standard sort of architectural model file that's been delivered, you would get perhaps an external shell, you'd get an internal core walls and floors, and then on the right hand side of that lower image you get the internal fit out. May have the different families and components or objects just for the bedroom layouts or for the apartment layouts, and they all come together to create just a single model. And there's various different uses then of the model. So here we've got an example of one of the high rises we're working on at the moment, and we're also now looking at the hoists and cranes as well within this development. So this is becoming really useful for this particular client to make sure that the crane lifts are suitable. So if you think of content, sometimes we just think of buildings, but actually content can expand into temporary logistics. It could be the bollards outside, or the traffic management system, or curbs and things like that. So it really expands not just as building elements, but also outside of that in terms of site logistics as well. So back into 5.7, which is the information model delivery, where the appointing party or the client should review that published information and make sure it's been checked against that criteria that was set out. And that's part of what BIM Tech would be doing as an auditor, and making sure that those are fit for purpose and answers the client's requirements. And then project closeout, ultimately the output of the information management process should be the creation of an asset information model, or commonly referred to as the AIM, which contains all the information needed to operate and maintain those objects during the life of the building. So once it's handed over and it's in use, it's making sure that the asset information that's being gathered during the construction process is then handed over so that the facilities management team can start to manage that building appropriately and have all the information about those assets delivered to them. In order to do that, there needs to be an information exchange process, and this is covered in the ISO 19650 Part 4, where at the end of the project, those components are part of the asset information model, and they're delivered in the standard form of COBie. So that's what the schema is that we refer to, and it's nothing more than a database really of the non-graphical data that can sit alongside the model, the graphical model, and that contains all the necessary documentation, asset codes and manufacturer's details, and warranty information, etc., in one place. And the idea is that it is human readable. It's not intended to be. It's intended for transferring of data from one system to another. So that would be then the way of transferring the construction information across into the facilities management information. So part 4 details the information exchange, and that is typically using COBie. So the information that we've gathered is then handed over digitally, and this will assist those facilities management teams at building handover. And what we can see here is some examples of how that might look in a boiler room. So these components would be developed in 3D and then handed over at handover stage, where you can see the start of these tags starting to come in, so the QR codes, and these QR codes can then be transferred across into the facilities management database alongside that COBie information. So you get a code and asset ID, and all that data then is in one place ready to go across to the facilities management team so they can manage the asset. I've got a short video here of how that would look with a 3D first model approach. So if you look at a typical apartment, it's about, if you wanted to replace anything in the boiler, you would have access to the boiler information immediately via a web browser. And this could also be tenants if you are renting out a high-rise building, for example, and the tenants needed the documentation, then this could be a way of giving them access to a portal where they could look at the information for their content or their apartment. So that's a good way of using that, and we're seeing more and more uptake on this way of working within the residential sector within the UK in terms of fire and risk as well, and de-risking those buildings and giving the tenants a portal to access all the information about their building. Finally, I think CDM and health and safety, this has its own standard. It's currently in development, I believe, at the moment to make it an ISO. It's currently a PAS 1192, and this is the Part 6 document. And this is intended to enable the sharing of health and safety information across the entire life cycle of a project, from the inception and delivery stage through to construction and handover and operations. So it's really to identify any health and safety and then also any health and safety mitigation measures that may be put in place that's important for the client and the people that are using those buildings. What we find within the UK is that typically we're finding markers within the 3D model which are embedded with health and safety information. It may be risk of fall from height, it could be cleaning and maintenance, it could be hazardous substances, etc. And a really easy, common way of resolving some of this is just to have markers within your 3D model which contains the risk, and those can be scheduled out. So the draft standard itself has been through the first 2 stages, and consultation began around November last year, and I think that closed in January this year. So it's going to come out at some point as a ISO standard. And the intention behind it is to provide a safer and healthier environment for end users, mitigate any inherent risks, improve the health and safety and reduce incidents, and get the relevant health and safety information to the right people at the right time, and increase construction and operational value. Other ways we're seeing this kind of play out as well is, we're again thinking of fire and thinking of fireproofing in buildings and things. We have here an image of various services going through a builder's work hole within a building, and the team responsible for this have put in the fireproofing. However, it's a very bad example, and I just wanted to point this out. So the opening in the firewall is a single large opening with multiple surfaces, but the red boxes you see here are the requirements for fireproofing. So at design stage, someone may pick this up and say, well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fire stopping requirements, when in the reality is you've got one single large fireproofing requirement. So since Grenfell disaster in the UK, we've had a real big uptake on how fire is handled within the BIM process, and fire risk is handled. So things like fireproofing and fire stopping and fire rating of objects has become a real big topic, and how we can incorporate those requirements into BIM deliverables. So we are seeing more of this within the UK here now. Again, it's a managed process, so I would audit these objects as well, make sure they're in there, make sure they've got the right data attached to them, and those would be at set stages of the project. So again, another short video here on what that could look like when we get to deliver this on site. So when you come to handover, you might have fire collars, for example, and you may want to say, well, how do I know who signed that off? How can I find out the manufacturer's information about that? Where's the guidance? So within model first approach, such as TwinView, you can find out who signed that off, when they signed it off, and that's all then attached to that 3D model as well. So just to sort of summarize the health and safety part, which is the part 5, is designers include markers in the 3D models. This is embedded with health and safety data, metadata, and that then gets sent on to principal designers who extract all of that information and record it in a single file. So you may get multiple architectural practice, structural, MEP, and all those have their own risks, and those will all be collated from the model to record and inform the operations and maintenance team of any residual risks that are left over. So I'm coming to the end of the presentation now. So last couple of slides. So in terms of training and certification, there are quite a lot out there who will offer training as well. And I've just pointed out here 2 of the main players for training and certification, and some links down below. So we've got the BSI, which is the British Standard Institute, and we also have the Bureau of Veritas, which would offer certification as well. So those are 2 avenues which you could look at for further information in terms of upskilling or training if you require it. And I know we're quite a lot on the call today are manufacturers, so it's just looking at where you fit in the supply chain and what training you would actually require, unless you start to perhaps outsource that, and then you may not need too much training internally, but very much depends on the background in which you are developing content. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. I'll hand over back to Tyrone, and we'll look at any questions that may come through.
Amazing, Anthony. Thank you so much for that. That was my favourite one so far. You told me it was going to be dry, but super interesting.
Oh, excellent.
Okay. So we do have a few questions here. We've got one here. One of the first ones was, these are currently standard. Do you think they'll become regulations in time? And then us, if so, how far away would that be, do you think?
I don't think they'll become regulation, but I think what we find is that clients will mandate the use of standards. So that clients will set out what standards they want things to be developed to. So whilst they won't, I don't feel they will become regulation. It's still useful to develop standards and therefore deploy standards so we can make sure we're hitting the minimum criteria. It's a bit like housing code. There are multiple ways to achieve various different housing codes. So it can't be forced, but if you can prove that you are developing in the same way as that standard, I'm thinking wider now, just BIM, but you get that a lot in other industries where you've got standards. If you don't follow the standards, there are other ways of doing things, but can you prove that it's following those processes and setting out similar output? So no, in short, I don't think it will become regulation. They are standards, which is a guide in how you should be deploying BIM methodologies.
Yeah, okay, great. And I guess, if you're a builder and you want to win that job, they're going to be regulations anyway.
Yeah.
In some regards.
Indeed.
I'm going to jump down the questions, because there's one that relates to that, and that is, so I'll preface this with, so builders in Australia will comply with some of the ISOs, like they'll comply to health and safety, quality, a couple of the others they normally apply to. So will this mean, so for clients offering a job, And you know, so if a client's offering a job or a government's offering a job that wants to adhere to these standards, does that mean the builders will have to comply through ISO and get a certificate?
No, so compliance and certification is still a topic which I find an issue, because I don't think you need certification in order to be compliant, because you can achieve the same from having your own protocols in place or having your own rigorous health and safety deliverables and standards in place within your company. So you don't need the certification for that. You don't need to be a certified individual or have an accreditation necessarily, but it helps. So what you're seeing is if clients go out with a pre-qualification questionnaire that you need to answer, some do ask for qualifications, but if you don't have them, you can often answer it with correct training and correct standards within your own business to say that this is how you deploy those aspects of whatever it might be across your business. So I have a real issue with that, because I think you can, just because you have a accredited piece of paper in your hand doesn't mean, you know, you're absolutely expert at delivering whatever subject that might be. So I think if you can answer it via your own internal documentation, then a certification isn't always required within various different reasons. Yeah. So I don't think it's compulsory to have a certification.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, I hear you on that, because I know plenty of builders that have the ISO certificates on their wall, but I also hear them freaking out when they're getting audited.
Yeah.
So on that as well is, if you so again, preface it by that the Queensland government in Australia has a BIM mandate for projects above 50 mil. Now, I'm not actually sure whether or not, maybe someone can tell us. I'm not sure if they have that they want people to comply to ISO 19650 as well. But I'm thinking, you know, has there been, like in the projects in the UK, has there been an audit? Or what's the auditing process like? Like, you know, as this expands more and more into Australia, you know, because they'll probably take what they're doing in the UK that's working. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, which I unfortunately don't know the answer to, Tyrone, or whether there's been audits on. So when it first came about and the mandate first came about in the UK, it was for government-funded projects to be at the BIM level 2 by 2016. So anything that was funded by government, when you're talking government buildings, it could be schools, it could be prisons and things like that, so hospitals, etc. I don't think there's any audit to make sure that they're all being delivered to a BIM standard. I think I don't know to any. I could be completely off topic here, but you know, I've got some projects on that are only just coming up to speed now. You know, we're in 2024, and we've got various different projects on that are government funded, which they are still upskilling. They know nothing about what they need to be delivering. So I think, given that we're many years on from that mandate and I'm still seeing a shortage of skills within those different areas, I don't think it's audited personally. And I think it would be very difficult to audit, to be honest. I think it needs to come from a client push. So, you know, whilst it is a mandate of your 50 million, which you've suggested there, you know, where's the audit, and who says that, yes, this has been delivered or hasn't been delivered, and what's the negative side of that if you don't deliver it? You know, who's there holding the stick? I don't know the answer, honestly, Tyrone. Yeah, not sure.
Yeah, no. So it's a work in progress everywhere.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. So, simple one. Someone's asking about the reference to a report. Was it the Marks and Brew report? I think it was on your second or third slide.
The Bew Richards report, yeah. What was the question there
Sorry,
against
just
that,
cut out a
Tyrone?
second for me there.
Okay,
Was it the
apologies.
Marks and Brew report?
Yeah, the Bew Richards report. Yeah.
Just trying to reference that report. Bew Richards.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get that off you and send it on.
Okay.
Someone's just asked, can you please shed some light on ISO 19650 versus Singapore BCA standards? In terms of process, Singapore is doing the same as ISO 19650, but why are they not adopting ISO?
Slightly outside of my expertise there, I think.
Information.
Tyrone. I don't know. I've not worked within the Singapore area, so I unfortunately can't answer that one.
Yeah, no, that's all right. We'll try and dig up some information for the person who asked that question. What else have we got? Someone's asked, I think this is from someone that's been talking to one of our techs. I think they're just asking, what are the COBE information on exchanges, or what is COBE data?
Yeah, so COBE is a schema which is a way of exchanging information between platforms. The Part 4 gives, if you can get hold of the ISO 19650 Part 4, which talks about COBE, it will tell you how that should be set out. And there's certain criteria which you need to make sure you adhere to, and certain platforms can deliver COBE. So Revit, if you're looking at Revit, has various different add-ins which you can then make sure that you are complying with the COBE deliverables. In terms of what assets need maintaining, that will always come from the client in terms of the asset information requirements. And COBE is the way to deliver that, or one of the ways to deliver that in a standard format. So commonly you would open that up in Excel. If it's an external database, you would commonly open that up in Excel. But the idea is that it becomes a computer readable database with lots of tabs at the bottom. And the idea is that it tells you what assets you have in your building. It tells you the type of information. So type of, let's say, argument's sake, it's an air handling unit. You would have what type it is, what the manufacturer's information, email address is, the warranty information, and then it would tell you where that sits in the building. So it would give you the space that belongs to, and then it would give you information about that space as well. So you can see what components exist, where they exist, and the data against them as well, and who put that together. So it's all in a standard format, and the idea behind COBE is it's an exchange format to go from one system to the next, but commonly it would open up in Microsoft Excel, for example. But yeah, Part 4 is your best document to look at for that.
Okay, that's good. And that, in a way, covers probably the last question we had. And it's about, what do suppliers, like manufacturers of products, most need to be aware of if they're going to make their objects, ready to go into these kinds of projects. And that would be, COBE data. And
it is.
Yeah, everything you spoke about.
Yeah, so it is, Tyrone. I think from a manufacturer's perspective, there's no extra data requirements, I would have thought, because you are the manufacturer, you are providing that content physically. So you probably already have all the spec sheets, you probably already have all the data, the warranty information, and you've got the O&M manuals, and you have them, all that data that the construction teams require. You're the best person to know what that information is. So it's just about how that's structured within the components, which is a standard way of structuring the data. It's an information structure within those. So when you are getting your content created, you already know the information. It's just about formatting that into a suitable standardized way of delivering that within a BIM object. There's many platforms of BIM. I haven't mentioned anything necessarily today, but Revit's one of the biggest, owned by Autodesk, isn't it? So commonly we refer to them as families, but I try and use BIM Object because many other platforms do exist.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess Australia would be, Australian suppliers would be getting their first real taste of that in somewhere like Queensland, where they're trying to BIM model things.
Yeah.
They're working out that the data is not correct, well, in the right format, which is the main problem we see with content. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. So right on time. Thank you so much, Anthony. That was fantastic. Great. Thanks for your time. Thanks for jumping.
No problem.
And really appreciate it. So again, thank you to everyone else who has jumped on, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me. Cheers, Tyrone.